Welcome today. So thank you for joining us. So this is the last session in our systematic review series. So bringing it all together, quality assessment, evaluation, documentation, and data management. So we're kind of going to cover a lot this week. It's sort of the rest of the process. So here we are. We made it from week 1 all the way to week 5. And today we're going to talk about the extraction of articles. We'll look at the PRISMA flowchart again, the step of screening articles, doing quality assessment and risk of bias, synthesizing findings and writing your article, and then finding journals for publication, doing some data management planning, updating a review if you have a review you'd like to have updated or update one that's been done. And then we'll have time for questions and answers, of course, at the end. So here's that visual chart that I've been showing the last few weeks. So you can see we spent a lot of time getting to the point of 3, where the actual process for the team really begins. We'll kind of go through all of that today. And again, you can kind of see this, this step. It can be iterative. We can come back. We need to at various points in time. So last time we left off with the literature searching, and we had located articles, and our search strategy had been finalized. We put that into our protocol, and we were ready to go. So at that point in time, the librarian is going to take the search strategy that you agreed on, and then translate it into those other databases that you had identified. And then you should end up with a whole lot of results, hopefully, that you'll end up screening through this process. So most likely, those will be exported into something like EndNote or Zotero, although you can export them directly into some of the screening software, which we'll get into later. But the first step for that, which generally the librarian will do, is to deduplicate the articles. So obviously, each database is going to have some overlap because they all contain, they can contain similar articles or journals, or the same journals, I should say. And so each one will be extracted separately, and then we will record the number of articles from each of the databases. And then they're going to be combined and deduplicated, because obviously you don't want to have to go through multiple articles that you've already looked at. Sometimes that can be done manually, sometimes it can be done automated. But then your team should end up getting a final list of articles that you will begin screening. So that step generally is where the librarian sort of leaves the team to do the work. And then potentially, if the librarian is going to be an author, they will write the methodology section for that, that whole process. So we are finally to screening. And most of the time, reviewers will use screening tools or software to help with this process. So after screening the results, the team will have, they'll be blinded as they screen these. So they'll be looking at them individually to decide if it meets the inclusion or exclusion criteria. And then if there are any disagreements, generally there's a third reader who will read and try to resolve those arguments. We'll kind of get into that a little bit too. But it's a good idea before you even get started to just select a subset of the articles. So maybe, 20 articles, 30 articles, and run a pilot with each reviewer just to see if that inclusion exclusion criteria that you set up, to see if it's really well defined for what you're trying to do. So it'll give you an idea, where there may be disagreements, and that can kind of help you to clean up that list of criteria so that it's much more clear as the reviewers are going through, and then they'll have a higher rate of agreement, hopefully at the end of that process. So I'm going to take us back to the PRISMA flowchart so we can see this. So this is the PRISMA flowchart here, and this is what you'll be filling out when you're doing your project. So the identification piece here, basically, this is talking about the number of records that you get from each of the databases at the beginning. So you'll list, if you're searching 5 databases, you'll put 5 here, and then the number of registers. Let's say we're looking for systematic reviews that have previously been done and registers, things like that. We can write the number there. And then that will give us the total. Right here next to it, we'll put the total of articles that we found from each one of those. So that will be before duplication. So the librarian will give you those numbers. Screening removed before screening. So we will take the duplicate records and record how many duplicates were removed at that stage. And then if there were any records marked as ineligible automation tools, if you're using those, let's say that it was matched as being not having enough content. I'm not exactly sure actually on that part. I haven't used automation tools for this piece of it, but you would record any of those items in that those two top boxes. And then we get down to the screening. So the screening is really where so here we end up with the records screen. So that's going to be the number that the librarian gives to you after deduplication. So at this point, then what you're going to be doing is these records will end up being screened by title abstract. So you're going to be, again, using the items that are in the inclusion exclusion criteria to read those titles and abstracts and see if they meet the inclusion criteria, or if it's unclear, you may include them at this point in time. If it's clear that they should be excluded, you obviously will exclude those and you'll record that number here. At this stage, you don't need any explanations for this. You can just record the numbers that weren't relevant, and it'll probably be a fairly large number. So then we move on to all the records that we said that we've screened that we want to keep. You need to try to retrieve those full text. So this will be the number minus the excluded that we are going to seek for retrieval for full text retrieval. And then this over here, this report's not retrieved. What this is let's say you had 40 articles that you wanted full text, and there were 2 that you couldn't locate anywhere through interlibrary loan. You were just not able to get them. Then you would have to say that there were 2 items that you were not able to retrieve. That number should be small, because really you should try to do the best you can to get all the articles that you had identified. So then after that, we move on to the full text screening. So you will get the full text of the articles that you any you didn't retrieve, you'll subtract from here, move this down. And then these will be the full text articles that the team will read in order to determine eligibility based on the full article. So at this stage, any reports that are excluded, you need to write a reason and then the number of articles that you excluded for that reason. So then finally, those articles will come down in here. And then also, I'm going to come over here. This second part on the right-hand side talks about studies via other methods. So let's say that you were looking at websites, or you're looking at, white or gray papers from organizations. Let's say you were searching the citation lists on the bottom of your articles. You will write down any numbers of those that you identified not through the database searching. And then you'll go through the same process of trying to get full text. If you weren't able to get them, you'll record that number. Same thing, reports assessed for eligibility, excluded for X reasons, and then you will add those in here as well. And so this is one little piece that is a little bit confusing. So at the very bottom here, it says studies included in review and reports included in review. Some studies will have more than one report. So let's say that a team did a study and they followed up at 3 months and at 12 months and wrote 2 different reports on those. You would count the number of reports total, but if it's the same study being identified, you'd only have 1 study and potentially 2 reports in the example that I just gave you. So that's the PRISMA flowchart that you will be generating as you go through this screening process. So now we're going to talk about some screening tools. So there are tools available to help you with the screening. There's actually 2 different free methods if you have Excel or the desktop version of EndNote. And if you're interested in those, I can give you the articles and the directions for how to do those methods. Otherwise, there's some software or platforms you can subscribe to. So Covidence is one that is fairly expensive. We do not have a subscription here at the University of Michigan Flint. Ann Arbor does, but I believe Michigan Medicine pays for it. So that's why we don't have access to it. But you can get, if your department or if you individually want to get a yearly subscription, you can. Distiller SR is another one that has a monthly subscription. And then Rayyan is a free low-cost subscription one that a lot of people use and really like. And to be honest, I don't have any experience really using any of these because I kind of leave off at the literature screening stage. But in any presentation and people that I've talked to, there really isn't one that's necessarily better than the other. It's one of those kind of things where you can kind of experiment and see what works best and what features you like best. But there's a lot of people who really like Rayyan, even though it's free. So I would encourage you to kind of scope these all out and see an example and see if you like one better than the other. So I'm going to jump out to Rayyan real quick just to kind of show you. As I said, I have very little experience with this, but I can at least show you sort of what the process looks like. Let me sign in. So yesterday I came in and I just started an example review here. So I imported 104 articles. So if you were doing a study, you would come in, find, obviously set up a new review. You come in here and then it will show you all of the articles that you imported in from your citation management software or whatever. So these are some articles about patient satisfaction with facial plastic surgery. So you can see here, it lists the articles at the top, and if I click on them, down below, it will do some things here on the side. Like if you want to include keywords for exclusion, get rid of any of these automatic ones they have. Like yesterday, I looked up rhinoplasty, and I had 15 articles that matched that keyword. So you can see here, it'll highlight those words for you that you have in this keyword section, which can kind of help you as you're looking through the abstracts. But at this point in time, then the reviewers can look through. They can say, yes, include this to the next step, maybe, which would essentially move it on to the next step as well, or exclude, and then you can give reasons, that sort of thing. And then one of the things you can do is you can invite people to collaborate. And so what will happen if you invite someone to collaborate? Let's see if I can get this to work. Is when you go into it at first, you can invite someone. So I'm going to invite myself as a collaborator. A different account. And then what ends up happening is once you're collaborating with someone, let me get this to load again. And obviously this will take longer to load if you have thousands of articles. I only had 104, so it's not quite as long. But once you have someone collaborating, you can see then the blind turns on. So now I know that my decisions and labels aren't showing with the collaborator, and the collaborators are not showing with mine. So when I look at these now, and I make those decisions, the blind is on. So it'll say that I approved this one. And then it'll say, my collaborator in their side, it'll say if they approved it or excluded it, or included it or excluded it. And then at the end, we can turn the blind off, and that's when we can compare our findings. So then you can upload PDF full text when you get to the full text part of it. But like I said, I just wanted to kind of briefly show you how that works. And that's essentially what these softwares are really great at. Some of them will fill out the PRISMA flowchart for you. I'm not quite sure if Rayyan does, but again, if you have any questions about these, I have lots of resources and lots of people who've used all the different ones, and I can help you find out more information about those. So then the next step that the team will go on to after they have screened everything and they have gotten down to their final list of articles that they want to use for the actual synthesis, they're going to do some quality assessment or critical appraisal. And this is one of the main features of a systematic review is that, and it does differ from some of the other kinds of reviews, like scoping reviews don't necessarily have a quality assessment or critical appraisal, because the scoping review is just looking kind of to see what's out there. Or with a systematic review, you want to do that appraisal to see if these are high quality journal articles, and if, what level of bias they have. So generally, these quality assessments or critical appraisals will look at that risk of bias. Because again, the main goal of a systematic review is to identify high quality research in order to synthesize the findings with the goal towards reducing bias. So by looking at the articles that you found to see what kind of biases they may have, like if they didn't disclose a funder, or if, they're not including all of the information that, there's a lot of different checklists and information on how to go about doing bias screening. And the Cochrane Handbook has 2 chapters, actually, which I linked to in here, that will kind of walk you through bias screening and how that works. And then I did want to highlight this tool because this is a really, really great, a great tool that I found very useful. It's called the Systematic Review Toolbox. Click out to that as well. So what this is it's a page that an organization put together where you can find specific things, like if you have a specific tool you're looking for, Otherwise, if you're looking for just guidance or software, so let's say I want some software to help me with screening, for example. And it'll allow you to say what kind of review you're doing. So if we're doing a systematic review, and I want something with a free version available, we can click search, and it'll give us a list of options, which is pretty good. So here you can see Rayyan, which is one of the great free options. But also, like if you're just looking for general guidance or tools, so let's go back to guidance, and I'm going to do systematic review, quality assessment. So this gives me 48 different quality assessment sites that you can use to find critical appraisal for whatever it is you're looking for. So some of them will have specific ones for specific study types, or like this one here is for quantitative studies. You can find some places like the Joanna Briggs Institute Critical Appraisal. It has tools for separate tools for multiple different study types. So look through this if you're looking for some of those screening tools, because like I said, there's a lot available, and then, you can cite them and have, know that you're using an objective tool to appraise these things, which is really what you want to be doing, is to have that objective way to, compare the articles. So I really, really like that tool. All right, and then we are on to synthesizing findings and writing the article. So this is where the team takes those final articles that they found, and they assess them for bias or other quality assessment characteristics. And you're going to end up writing your article. And so this is the part where if you aren't familiar with the methodologies that you're going to be using, or if you haven't written an article before, we have so many resources in the library that I'm hard pressed to just identify one, but about whatever it is that you're trying to do, whatever kind of review you're trying to write, any methodologies. So make sure you reach out, because we can help you for your specific discipline or what kind of research you're doing. So I want to go through the PRISMA 2020 checklist again. Let's see if we can get this one to load automatically. Looks like it is. Okay. And oops, bump this up too. So last week we kind of just got into the very beginning of this, up through the really the search strategy and the selection process. So then the rest of this then basically is going to help you as you're writing that article. You can kind of come through here and just make sure that you're addressing each and every piece of this PRISMA checklist as you're writing your article. So it can be a really great outline for you, and it really does kind of make the writing process a lot easier. So, it'll ask you to specify the method used to assess risk. Then it'll ask you what kind of measures you were looking for, and then describing the process of how you synthesize things. And then as you get into that, then for the results, it'll give you the same sort of, characteristics that you'll need to have. And so just this in itself is a really, really great tool to have in front of you. I would say the entire process, get it at the very beginning. You've seen the PRISMA P protocol checklist. Use that for the protocol, use this for the main article, and it will really, really help you to kind of stay on track and not get off into areas that you don't really need to address in your article. It will kind of keep you focused and make sure that you're hitting all of those areas that publishers and journals are going to want to see in order to publish your article, and in order to make sure really it's a gold standard type systematic review. And one of the things that actually is in that PRISMA checklist, and you kind of should have thought about in the protocol, now you'll flesh it out a little bit more, is how to plan to store and make your data and your documents accessible. So there's a couple of movements going on right now in federal agencies. So the NIH, and there was an OSTP memo from the White House for research, that they're all moving in the direction of having federally funded research be made open access. So that is an effort to allow the American taxpayers to have access to the research that is being conducted with their funds. So just be aware of that, because that really is sort of becoming more and more of a requirement. And managing for data at the beginning, if you saw our Deep Blue presentation last week, managing for it at the beginning through the process will really help to streamline it. So that at the end, all your documents and everything are in the format they need to be, and you don't have to scrabble to make, changes or do things like that. So there are lots of different discipline specific repositories that you can find. And if you know one that you'd like to work with, we can help you to make that happen. There's also generalist repositories. Deep Blue Documents and Deep Blue Data are the two institutional repositories for the University of Michigan. And so really faculty, staff, and students can deposit. And the one really nice thing about Deep Blue data and documents is that it is indexed by Google. So anything you put in there will be findable. And you'll get a DOI, which is really, really great because you'll have that permanent identifier that you can send to journals, along with your article. Let's say, if you can share your appendices, supplemental material, figures and charts, this is a great place to store those and just give them that link, and then they can access it through there. And it's also really great for just having your things in there to get a DOI. Let's say you want to put it on your CV or resume, especially for students, that can be really, really useful as well. But the Deep Blue team in the presentation that we had last week, they iterated this multiple times that they can help you with the entire scope of data management planning from the whole life cycle. So if you have questions from the beginning to the end, they are not just dealing with their repository. They will kind of help you if let's say you're going to try to put something in ICPSR, if you're doing social science research, they can help you kind of figure out how to do that and manage that process as well. So reach out to them. If you have questions, you can reach out to me as well, and I can help either find the answer for you or put you in touch with them. And then finally, when you've got your article, you're going to want to be finding someplace to publish it, obviously. And so you may have an idea at the beginning, but you may not have an idea until the end. So these are just some considerations when you're looking for journals to publish in. Open access versus traditional publishing models. So that's a big question these days. Does the journal publish your type of review? And is the journal you're interested in reputable? So for open access, the open access model, and this is sort of getting back to those, the NIH and the OSTP memo, basically open access, the publication model flips the cost from the subscriber to the author. So in the traditional publication world, institutions or individuals pay for subscriptions, and they are the ones who pay to access the content. So obviously that sort of limits the reach of your research only to those people who have access through those subscriptions. With open access, the author ends up paying a fee in order to have it published. So that allows much wider dissemination of your work, but the cost does fall onto you as the researcher. So just be aware of that. Some places even have a choice where you can do open access or traditional. Some are only open access, some are only traditional. So just make sure you kind of see what costs are going to be involved and plan for that if you do plan on publishing open access. Because I think I saw recently that the average is like from $1,400 to $2,500. That's the average cost to submit to publish in one of these open access journals. But the University of Michigan does have several open access agreements. So there's a bunch of different publishers that University of Michigan works with in order to offset or discount the cost to authors. So if you have a journal you're interested in publishing in and you're not sure if we have an agreement, there is a web page which I linked to on here, but feel free to contact me and I can kind of look into it too, because occasionally there's new open access agreements that aren't on the page or I don't know about. And so if you contact me, I can contact the people who manage that in Ann Arbor to find out if there are any ways to discount those costs for you. And then I do want to talk about predatory journals. So there are predatory journals out there and conferences. So sometimes, you may get an email, a request for papers, those sorts of things. And these journals will take your money for publishing your work and promise a peer review process. But obviously, with a predatory journal, they don't do any of that. They publish sub-quality articles that end up making it into databases and indexes. And they do proliferate quickly. And so there used to be some lists and ways to find them, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. So there's some resources in the next slide that we're going to look at because it's really important to do this work ahead of time because you do not want to publish in a predatory journal, obviously, if you can avoid it. So we have several tools to examine journals to see if they're appropriate and high quality, and I'll kind of go through all these. So journal citation reports and Simago Journal and Country Rank are both databases that they're two different databases with two different ranking formulas, but essentially what they do is they take the journals, they take the number of articles published, the number of citations that these articles are getting, and they end up coming up with a weighted ranking for these journals in the different disciplines for you to see, the rank of how likely you are to be cited if you publish in a particular journal, for example. So looking at these can be really helpful. These are subscriptions we have through the library. Just look up your journal title. Simago does tend to be more international with international journals, where journal citation reports tends to be sort of more US and Western Europe focused. There are other journals in there, but I would say definitely check both of these if you're interested in journal and you're not finding one in journal citation reports. You might find it in Simago. I am going to show you browsing, which is a tool that we have, and it's not really for this purpose, but I like to use it for this purpose. Let's say you just aren't really sure of what's out there in a field, and you just kind of want to browse through quickly and see, high-ranking journals in your field that that we have access to. And this is actually, let me show you really quickly. This is actually linked on our homepage. If you go here under journals, there's a little link for browsing. So let's go back there. But this links to all of our electronic subscriptions. And this is also a place where you can set up a bookshelf, sort of like an RSS feed where you can, read new published articles. So if you're interested in doing that, setting up a bookshelf, let me know. I can help you with that as well. But they have it basically broken up into large concepts, and you can kind of narrow down to what you want. So let's start with biomedical and health sciences. And then you can see it's broken down even further. So I'm going to go to nursing. And then here are all the nursing subsets. So let's just go with nursing research here. So what it does is it tells us all of the journals that we subscribe to here in the library, and the default is A to Z, but I really like this, that you can sort them by journal rank. So if you're not sure and you just want to get some ideas of journals to look into, and not come up with not have to look through a crazy database that's full of things, this is just a really quick and easy visual way for you to see in these smaller subsets which journals may be worth exploring. So now that I've sorted by journal rank, you can see here the SJR, which is the Simago journal ranking, and it gives you the numbers. And so you can see that most of these have numbers, but then there are a few that are unranked. So that can give you pause if you see that it's unranked. It could be an issue. It also could be that the journal's just new, or it's in a language that maybe isn't being ranked by Simago, or they're not looking into it. But this is like I said, a really quick visual way to kind of get some titles that you can look into. And then another thing that's useful is we have something called Ulrich's Web Global Serials Directory. So Ulrich's Web is just essentially a directory of serials that are published. And so you can type in a title of something you're looking for. Look up nurse educator. And what you can see then is just some basic information about it. And you can see, who the publisher is, what country, if it's currently active. And then there's just some other nice info in here. There's, ways that you can kind of limit. But one of the things I look for straight away is if there's this little referee journal, that at least shows me that it's peer reviewed. So if I'm, looking at journals and I'm not sure, just at a glance, if they're peer reviewed, this is another way to know if it's peer reviewed. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not predatory, but it'll at least tell you that it's peer reviewed and that it's active. And you can kind of see that information. And so by putting those all together, you hopefully can get a good idea, if those journals are showing up, if they have citations or citation rankings. And again, you can always reach out to me. I can contact my colleagues to see if anybody has familiarity with it, or I can look into it a little bit deeper, but I'm always happy to help you with that. And then if you're looking just basically to see if this is an appropriate journal to publish in, if you go to the journal pages themselves, usually go to, generally you can see under the scope, aims, about this journal, those sorts of things, what they're interested in publishing. So if we come here then, sometimes it's under for authors. So this one, let's try here into journal. They usually give you some sort of a a scope and some information about what kinds of things that they collect. And if it doesn't explicitly say anything about reviews, generally speaking, most of these will accept systematic reviews, but you may want to check and contact the journal directly. Sometimes they will say we collect systematic and scoping reviews, but not rapid reviews, things like that. So kind of check through each site to see on the actual page what information they have, and if you can't find it, usually you can get that from them. And then another thing you can do is just search within those particular journals to see if they've previously published a scoping review or if they've previously published a systematic review. That should give you an idea that those are obviously kinds of publications that they do accept. Updating review is the very last step. So if a previously published review, you may look it up or maybe you did it yourself and you realize that things have changed a lot since it was published. It may be time to run an update on this review if it's not currently adding, value to the field that you're working in. So you really need to look at it and see if the original question is still valid or relevant, and if what kind of information is out there that's new. Again, you could do like a scoping review ahead of time to kind of see if that's appropriate. And if you find that there is a lot of content that's new, and that the original question is relevant, you may want to update that older review. But if there's substantial changes, the question's not valid, you may just decide to do a brand new review for that topic. And again, there's a link here in the Cochrane Handbook to how to update a review, which is really useful. And then finally, I just want to give you some general resources for systematic reviews. So these are pages from organizations that are very sort of tied into these kinds of methodologies. So in health, Cochrane Handbook for Systematic Reviews of Interventions is like the handbook for systematic reviews, at least as far as Cochrane, who are very reputable, are concerned. The Joanna Briggs Institute also has a bunch of different resources. As I pointed out earlier, they have quality assessment tools. They have documentation on how to do these. And then if you're doing social sciences or educational work, you would probably want to use the Campbell collaboration. And then Sage Research Methods is a database that we have that is technically for the social sciences, but there is a lot of content in there that we subscribe to. It has videos, it has chapters, it has little handbooks on, survey creation or, different methodologies and how to do different sorts of steps within any kind of project in the social sciences. So I really recommend looking through these because there's a ton of information in here that can really help. So we did it. We've made it through 5 weeks. Don't worry if you don't understand it all. As you can see, there's lots and lots of resources available. And of course, I am always available. So if you need to contact me, again, here's my information. But with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Emily. Again, I learned a lot during this presentation and I've got a lot to learn. I just had one comment and a couple questions.
Yep.
We had a presentation recently by Nick Gasper and who else did it? I think it was Brandon Blinkenberg who did this portion, and they actually used ChatGPT to inquire about journals that were appropriate for your article. Of course, you would put information about your article in, but then it gave you a list of potential journals, which I thought was interesting. Now, of course, I would have to vet all of those. So I just wanted to say that out loud because others might be interested in exploring that option as well.
Yeah, I just real quick, I've kind of been messing with Chat GPT in various areas, and I would say it is cool and it brings up information, but yeah, like you said, you really do need to vet it. I was using Chat GPT recently to try to locate the contact information for some I think they were like depression screening tools for somebody.
Mhm.
And so I put the names of the tools in, and it would give me contact information. And I think I was looking into about, and I think I want to say there were about 10 of them, and about 7, it gave me wrong information. When I went to actually look for the
Oh, no.
person,
Uh-huh.
the person didn't exist or it was the wrong author. So I mean, it's definitely, it can be a time save. And I've been using it really for keyword generation. Like I will type in like, give me some synonyms for lower back pain, and it will give me some synonyms. I mean, to use it in that way is really useful because, you know, you can use them and test them and see if they work, and if they don't, fine. But yeah, I would say it's great to shorten up those kinds of things, but definitely vet to see that if the results that they're bringing up are valid before you just trust it, because it seems very trustworthy the way it comes back, and it's like, oh yes, this tool is owned by such and such person who works at such and such university. And then I went and looked, and they had never worked there or didn't exist or things like that.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, but it can like take some of those steps out and shorten it, where you at least have some things to look into. Because some of them did give me the information of the person to contact, and I was able to email them. So like I said, it'll get better probably with time, I'm sure. Yeah,
Okay.
sounds good.
2 other questions now
Mhm.
about what you know, about what you did present. Um, when I look at systematic reviews, they usually have like 4 or 5 pages that includes all the articles that you review.
Mhm.
Now, if it's like 15, that seems to be reasonable, but do you know if journals accept putting them in a repository like Deep Blue, or
It
if
it
they
did,
do have their own repository? But it just seems like it makes the article so much longer. Um, and these systematic review articles seem to be long enough.
yeah. So you're talking about like basically like the sort of quality assessment charts where they talk about each journal or
Yeah.
each article that they found. Yeah, generally I see those included in the articles. So I'm not sure that piece may be something that the each journal will kind
Yeah.
of decide for you. But like with some of the stuff that the librarians do, like the search strategies, things like that, we used to kind of just like summarize it and put it in the article. But now, like, and you might even still see those where it's like, we searched X and X terms, and like it'll give you like a tiny list. But really, what they want to see now is that more robust, like I showed last week, like really long list that we would put into an appendix or a supplemental document. And that's the kind of thing you could link to.
Hmm.
But I have a feeling probably with that piece of it that most journals would want that included, even though it does like, yeah. And when you get into meta analyses, they can be really long because they get into all that like forest plots and the risk of bias
Right.
assessments with like
Right.
for publication bias. So I think really that's probably on the actual print journal itself, what they decide to put in. But yeah,
Okay.
there really
Yeah.
a lot of places are moving in the way of those supplemental materials that people can access
Right.
on their own. So
Right.
I don't
Right.
know if that answers your question, but I think it is
No,
on the
it
journal.
does. It addresses it. So, but each journal you'll have to find out. But anyway, my last question, and I was actually surprised from a personal point of view to see that white papers are included in systematic review. So they are a legitimate source that you could include.
It depends really on what kind of topic you're doing, or it may be more like in the social sciences or in educate things like that. You really have to kind of see what's appropriate for your topic. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
if you're doing something that is very focused on, you know, how health providers are doing something, and a white paper would, you know, make sense. And also each kind of review does use different kinds of materials. So it may not be appropriate for your systematic review, but it may be appropriate for some other kinds of reviews and some other kinds of
Okay.
disciplines. So
Well, I'm concerned about this just from a personal point of view because I was a member of a group that put together a pretty decent white paper. But you would only know to access it if you are a APTA member, American
Yeah.
Physical Therapy member, and then you have to go into the specific special interest group. So, but it is a very worthwhile white paper, but I didn't know they could potentially be included in these systematic reviews.
Yeah, it would probably be in, one of those supplemental areas like on that right side where you're, things
Right.
that you know from your own experience that you would want to bring in. If you
Right.
know something that's worthwhile, they wouldn't really be included in the actual like database searching piece of it, right? But like if you
Right.
knew of something that was worthwhile that you wanted to bring in, that would be on that side where you could potentially do it. So,
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I have at this
all
point in
right.
time. I know
Well,
where
that's
you
great.
live.
Exactly. Come talk to me, Kathy, because I never mind that, obviously. So I
Okay.
want to thank you for attending and thank everybody who's watching. Thanks for sticking it through the whole series.
Thank you for watching this recorded webinar. Find upcoming webinars to register for at libcal.umflint.edu.